We have Ross Henry, the project manager from Queensland's Farmers Federation, to chat about the struggles of Queensland's drought-affected farmers and about our current Queensland drought and how best to help our farmers. Well, just for people to get a sense, although we just played Cow Punk, I'm under the impression that both cattle and sheep are not part of the Queensland Farmers Federation. So what is the Queensland Farmers Federation?
So the Queensland Farmers Federation is a federation of a number of different member organisations, generally in the animal side. So we look after pigs, chickens, dairy, and then in the plant side we've got the likes of sugarcane, cotton, and all the horticulture and a few different things as well. So we've got quite a bit.
Okay. We're basically wanting to talk about the drought right now. So before we talk about the drought, what is a definition of drought? Because maybe we don't know what that really is.
Yeah, I guess it's a basic question, but a good one to answer at the start. So a drought is obviously a prolonged period with no rain. So rain is essential for a lot of farming enterprises, and the declaration of a drought is a little bit subjective, especially within Queensland, but by its simple definition, it's just a lack of rain.
Okay, and drought is, for the most part, a normal cycle for some parts of Australia. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. So we've got massive climate drivers that affect the east coast of Australia. So El Nino and La Nina are two big climate drivers that are brought on by the Pacific Ocean. So in a El Nino year, or close to an El Nino year, which we're currently in, the tendency is to be drier than average.
Okay, and this particular drought so far, is this a normal drought or is this a more extreme drought?
It's been going on for a while, so we're probably into the sixth year at the moment, and then interrupted by that, and probably quite surprisingly, is actually floods. So for a lot of farmers up the east coast, the only significant rain they would have had in the last 6 years have either been from Cyclone Debbie or Cyclone Marsha. So it is a bit of an unusual time. We have had long and prolonged droughts in the past, but this one's definitely, it's definitely affecting a lot of people, and people are feeling the pinch right now.
For context, what was our worst historical drought?
So we've had the kind of the new century drought. So through the noughties was a pretty big drought as well. And then if you go looking back, we kind of swing between times of wet weather and then times of drought. So, the early thousands was obviously a dry time, and then it broke in 2010-11 with big floods. And then since then, we had a couple of wet years, and then we've gone back into another drought. So, but if you look back, everyone talks about the Federation drought, and that's obviously before all our times. But it is a pretty well-recorded drought. So that's back in that's probably 100 and something years ago. That seems to be one that's, well, I'm going to say sticks in everybody's memory, but that's probably a little bit too long for that. But it's definitely one of the biggest reported droughts. And that would be, since it's a federation, would be 1901, just in case people don't know the date? Yeah, around then, the 1901s. And then there was another one probably around the First and Second World War. There was a couple of droughts as well, which had an increased pressure on Australia because a lot of people weren't here because they were off overseas. And you mentioned, those floods like we had, like that surprise flood from Debbie. Now, I would speculate when you have a flood, the water doesn't seep in. Is it just kind of runs off, or how does that, am I right, or am I just... No, you're right. That's exactly right. So, the infiltrating rain or effective rain, or you can call it a number of different things, is what we're really looking for. So it's kind of like that soft, steady rain that can hit the ground and then has time to seep in and get into that root zone. That's the effective rain. What we do have and have had at the moment is quite like storm rain, cyclone rain, and that kind of and that causes flash flooding. So the ground is really hard; it acts like concrete, and the water hits it and just runs off. I just had a subscriber just sent in a text saying 1983 was dry as buggery. Was that a special highlight year as well in your memory, or? Well, it's a couple of years before I was born, but definitely the 80s into the 90s as well. So once a decade, there's kind of probably drought conditions or drought declarations within the state. A lot of people would speculate that, and I guess I would be one of them, that improper use, land use causes droughts, erosion and deforesting. Is there any truth to that? No, not really. So it's obviously important, and farmers will maintain their natural resource base because a better maintained natural resource base is going to respond better to rain. So it's in their best interest to manage their farm properly because it's going to be the most sustainable farm for them. The soil degradation, the erosion, the deforestation are irrelevant to the rain that can occur on that property. So the rain is generally done by, there's a local climatic systems, but then generally the broader climatic systems, like I mentioned before, like the El Nino, La Nina, they're the ones that really push. So that's like, warm water within the Pacific Ocean derives our weather here. So when we're in a period of dry weather, we've got the opposite in America. So in America, generally, they have wet weather when we have dry weather. So the global kind of climate drivers are really what affects the rainfall.
It always seems like, to me, that whenever we have like droughts, locusts appear as well. Are they related in any way, or?
No, not really.
Okay.
It might be just a causal thing, but generally, and probably unsurprisingly, locusts generally appear when the season's favourable because they've got more food. So they probably have a bigger impact in dry weather because there's not as much food, but when the season breaks and there's an abundance of food as well, they're quite a short lifestyle kind of insect and pest, so they'll boom with that increase of feed.
A lot of people, when they're thinking about like the drought, and it's getting a lot of media play right now, in terms of helping the farmers, we'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. Thinking about it, like, wouldn't drought affect different farmers differently? Like, a cotton farmer, a banana farmer, and a livestock farmer, how does it affect them differently? And what's their plan Bs?
Yeah, it massively affects them differently. So there are irrigated farms, obviously, that have a general supply of water that they can irrigate from. But in saying that, they're still affected by drought because, water supply through a drought generally is low, so even their irrigation supply is low. So that's obviously an issue. Livestock, so beef, cattle, sheep, pork, pigs, chickens, all of those industries definitely feel the pinch. There's a need to buy in food for those industries through periods of drought, but then because of the drought, food sources that they would traditionally get are scarce and expensive. So generally the cost of inputs and the cost of running their businesses goes through the roof. So the pork industry at the moment are probably dealing with a case where it's probably about 300 or 400 times more expensive to run their business at this point in time. And they're probably losing money for every pig that they produce. So, but that's kind of, a pretty extreme case. The general beef, cattle, kind of sheep, they can offload stock. Dairy cows, they have a bit of a different issue because they can't offload stock. They have to continue their milk supply and look after their cows. So they just have to buy in that feed, which gets really expensive. And then, the plant irrigation. So obviously with no rain, you have to rely on irrigation. If you've got irrigation, if you don't have irrigation and you're planting crops, there's a good chance that you won't bother planting them because they're not going to have the rain to get them through. So you're right, each industry will be dealing with this very differently. In regards to a plan B, it's quite hard. So a lot of them will have to either have money saved from the good years to just push them through this year. That's generally the plan B. Because there's not much that they can do without, doing damage to their business or their natural resource base through this season.
You mentioned about the pigs, and their feed. Is there, pigs are thought of for being a pig, that they'll eat anything. So, is there something else that the farmer can feed them that might not cost as much?
Not really. So the thought is that pigs will eat anything, but, once you get into kind of producing pigs and farm pigs, they've actually got a very well-maintained diet, and it's pretty specific to their requirements, so they're not missing out on anything. So they will just have to fork out the costs, and those input costs have gone through the roof. But unfortunately, to maintain their pigs and their business, they'll just have to pay that.
And are certain Queensland regional areas more affected than others right now?
Yeah, definitely. The further west you go, the drier it gets. They are typically drier areas as well, so that's probably not surprising. But the further west you get, the longer it's been in drought as well. So down past the southwest corner, it's really bad out there. It is marginal country, but there's no doubt that it is bad out there. Once you get a little bit closer into the coast, there's been some fortunate coastal showers, which generally happens with weather systems moving across the coast, that can kind of keep a little bit of green pick, but generally it's, the further west you go, the drier it gets.
well, obviously, someplace like Boolia or like St. George isn't going to be growing bananas. So are the banana farmers like feeling this as well, or?
Yeah, they'll have to be, their input costs, like I mentioned before, will be going up because they'll have to be irrigating more, and they'll have to be kind of managing all those different costs of electricity for pumping and all those different types of things. So they will be feeling the punch. And anything that's rain-fed, obviously this season they're not going to get the amount of rain that they traditionally would. So, those dryland paddocks where they're not irrigating would be definitely, underperforming by comparison to previous years.
We just got another text of possible advice, like, can you import some witch doctors?
Good in theory, although I think the local rain dance has not been proven to be truly effective yet.
Other than the witch doctors, do you guys use grey water at all, or is water shipped in? Is there desalination plants in the make?
There's no desalination plants in Queensland for this type of thing. So water is shipped in, definitely, when there's obviously no water there to water animals. In regards to crops and irrigation, there is schemes that, because of, say, systems like Cyclone Marsha and Cyclone Debbie, the water stores are generally okay. So there is still irrigation for those guys. But, when you get out west and, further west than those systems went, then water needs to be shipped in for those animals, definitely.
Can animals drink grey water, or, does that, get into us eventually as well?
Well, grey water is not really harmful in that sense. So it is okay and is safe for humans. And a lot of places out west, is not ideal by comparison to town water, but a lot of places out west have to deal with that generally. Essentially, it just means your soap doesn't lather, and a few different heavy metals that aren't bad for you are in there that stops your soap lathering. So grey water is not anything that we should be scared of, that's for sure.
Wouldn't we think about building an aqueduct from, let's say, Tully from, in far north Queensland? Or is that, something that's just cost prohibitive?
Cost prohibitive and a bit of a pipe dream. So,
okay.
The irrigation... pipe dream. So it's good in theory, I guess, because obviously there's more water up there. But when you actually look at the irrigation that happens through the southern and western regions, there's not efficient use of the water that we currently have anyway. So it'd be better investment by the government to improve the current systems and make sure that they're utilising water and not leaking, than putting in a big capital investment like that to ship water from somewhere like that.
Is there any technology that's in the works, or are there other countries that are sharing technology with us, or are we the leaders?
There's definitely technology that farmers can use is really important if you have the ability to irrigate. The water use efficiencies from certain irrigation systems are better than other ones in regards to the amount that they lose through that system. So that's really important. The other one is crop modification, genetic engineering. So, it seemed to be a little bit of a taboo subject, but, the ability to manipulate crops to have better growing conditions in drought is something that is used overseas, especially within the developing country where it's essential food products. So the ability to, develop plants that can survive these, pretty tough conditions in Australia is something that should be considered.
And when you're saying irrigation, I think of, just sprinklers with water. And before you mentioned about how the ground gets so hard from a drought, does irrigation also include breaking up the ground so that the water can seep in?
No, not really. So most farmers won't break up the ground because that, in the long run, goes back to those things you mentioned before around erosion, that kind of stuff. So most of them will try to maintain ground cover. And if you're maintaining ground cover, and that doesn't have to, that can be like mulch that you would normally have in your garden, that kind of thing. That's going to trap the moisture in the soil a lot better so you don't lose it to the atmosphere, because that's obviously one of the biggest ways that you lose water is it just gets evaporated out of the soil and heads up into the atmosphere.
I touched on this a little bit earlier. With this drought being in the media and the farmers doing it tough, so what are your suggestions for how the public can actually help these different types of farmers like banana, sheep, and wheat? Because obviously sending bales of hay to a banana farmer is not helpful.
Definitely not. There's a couple of things that are quite easy to do and practical to do. So obviously supporting Australian farmers is the first one. So if it's an Australian product, then obviously the farms are going back towards Australian farmers. There are imported fruit and veg, and if you can go for the Australian market and buy the Australian, that's obviously going to benefit the Australian growers. So that's an easy, simple one that everyone can do. Second to that, there are a number of registered charities out there. The better charities to think about are ones that put money back into the community as well. So, a bale of hay is great, and sending, canned food and all those different types of things are obviously beneficial, but it also means that the local store misses out on their general trade. So there are charities that will send the farmer a voucher for the local store, so then he can spend that in the local community, which is obviously a benefit. And one of the biggest things is, Queensland, even though it is drought, is still a beautiful place to go visit. So, if you were planning on going out west and you thought, a drought now and there's nothing to see, a lot of what is beautiful out west is the desert and those marginal countries and the beautiful scenery that we've got out there. So, if you were thinking about there, or you need to plan a holiday, going out west and spending your money in those local and rural communities is obviously going to be a huge benefit to them this time.
I used to live in the States, and the deserts are a lot closer, and the sunsets, like in Arizona, and the California desert, are like all red and purple, and I'm sure that's the same here. I mean, it really is like, just makes your eyes vibrate.
Oh, definitely. And then as soon as the sun goes down, you can see more stars than you will definitely when you're on the East Coast. So it is a beautiful place to visit. And before it heats up, I'd say. So it gets pretty hot in summer, though.
You mentioned a couple of charities in a generic way. People might not be able to work out what you mean by charities. Can you just throw a couple of names? Like, not that you're trying to promote any particular one.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do would be go to qff.org.au. And on that site, there's a red banner up the top that just clicks off, and it's got a list of the charities there that people can access. So that's got like rural aid, it's got the buy a bale and all those kind of charities that everybody's been talking about at the moment. But there's links to those, and it kind of gives a bit of an explanation of what they can do.
Okay, and then QFF, that's for
Queensland Farmers Federation.
Yeah, sorry,
QFF.org.au.
Okay, and is there anything else that people can do to get involved? Like, in terms of like, maybe like local volunteers or workshops or petitions or? At
the moment, I think, it's probably better just to go through those like registered charities at the moment. Like, there is a massive outpouring of support from the city, so we've just got to make sure that is going in the right direction, and obviously through a registered charity is definitely the best way to do that.